Hey guys, how's everybody doing? Um, Start of another week, right? So it's Monday. I'm sure you know that. I don't know why I'm telling you that, but hey. So this week is chapter 5. It's energy concepts, and this chapter is super important when it comes to being prepped for the next few chapters. So if there's terms here that you don't understand, if there's concepts you're struggling with, please reach out to me so that we can go over it together. Um, Otherwise, it'll just make the next couple of chapters challenging, okay? I apologize for my voice and probably my cough on and off. It's gonna take, I think, forever for some of that to come back to normal. So anyway, I'm going to start with my whiteboard here. Give me a sec, as always, to move stuff around. Okay. All right. I'm gonna start with some, just gonna type. Okay, so again, this is chapter 5. Let's try that without the caps. Nope, still not working. Okay. All right, so let's start with defining energy because as usual, the definition that we're going to use in science isn't going to be the same as necessarily what we talk about just in everyday life, right? We're like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm out of energy. Let's talk about it in the context of science and physics a little bit. So energy is the capacity to cause change and do work. Okay, so cause change, and that can be on a chemical level as far as changing chemical bonds, and do work, and that can be on a chemical level, but also just on the physical level of moving one thing from point A to point B. There's a couple different kinds of energy that you may be familiar with. There's kinetic energy, which I can spell. This is the energy of motion. Okay? So when you are moving, or when your cells are working, they are showing kinetic energy, okay, because it's energy of motion. Then we have something called potential energy. Potential energy is stored energy. So it has the potential to be used, right? It has the potential to be converted into kinetic energy. So on a really basic level, if you eat something, then our cells are going to use that to create energy on a cellular level. And then your body is going to use the food that you ate to have the strength and the ability to do work, whatever work might be, okay? So let's say that you're going to exercise. Well, you eat something healthy that's going to power your body, and then that's your potential energy. And then as soon as you start your workout, you're converting that potential energy from what you ate into the kinetic energy of your movement, okay? There's a special type of potential energy that is super important in our bodies and all living systems, and that's called chemical energy. And this is a special form of potential energy. And it's stored in chemical bonds. Okay? So on a chemical level, we gotta go way small. Okay. On a chemical level, when you have atoms joining together in these bonds, there's energy stored in those bonds. Okay. And sometimes it takes energy to make those bonds come apart. And when those bonds come apart, a lot of times energy is released. Okay. Because remember, we were talking about electrons and their interactions. And so when those bonds are broken and the electrons move, they can release energy. All right, so this is going to be a concept that we're going to be talking about, chapters 5, 6, and 7. I'll tell you now that you need to be able to just kind of tell your brain that we've got to go small. because the processes we're going to be talking about are small in the sense that they're on a cellular level. Okay, so we're not. I'm not going over body systems. Okay. Like I've told you to do in the past, like I told you to do with the cell, if there's ways that you can relate what we're doing on a tiny level to something that you're familiar with on a bigger level, then it will make it easier for you to remember. And I'll try to kind of give you some examples of that as we go along. But in the meantime, just set your mind for knowing that we're talking small, okay? All right. So when we're talking about energy, we need to talk about the law of conservation. I actually think this is really cool. The law of conservation of energy basically says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form, okay? Well, let me type it first. Goodness, it's like my keyboard is stuttering. Okay. So basically, guys, what this means is you could have potential energy converted to kinetic energy and vice versa, right? Kinetic energy changed to potential energy. But we're not actually creating or destroying energy in this process. This is important because it means that energy has to go somewhere, right? So when chemical bonds are broken and energy is released, that energy has to go somewhere and be used for something. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about as far as ATP. But before I get to ATP, we've got to go through a couple more vocabulary terms. We're going to talk about heat. What is heat? Heat is, well, let's think about it for a minute. When molecules are heated up, okay, what happens with their movement? Okay, so you've got molecules, we've added heat. What happens in their movement? Okay, they're going to speed up, okay? So if we have molecules moving around, what type of energy are we dealing with? Kinetic or potential? If you said kinetic, you get 100 points. Heat is kinetic energy, okay? Because it is the random motion of molecules. Notice here that it's random motion. So this is actually energy in its most chaotic form, okay? Because that energy is just going everywhere. It's not being channeled into any particular thing, okay? So energy in its most chaotic form. Because it's so chaotic, it's the most difficult form of energy to harness. And there are ways to do it, but it's not as, what do I want to say? It has its challenges when compared to something like solar energy or wind energy. You know, you can think about heat being used in a hot air balloon. Obviously, there's a heat source, and that heat, as it's released, is kinetic energy, the random motion of molecules, and the heat creates lift for the balloon. But it's not as easy to channel as other types of energy. Here's the cool thing about heat. Every type of energy conversion generates heat, okay? So again, we're not creating energy, we're not destroying it for the law of conservation of energy, but we are converting it between one form and another. So anytime you have potential energy being converted to kinetic, or kinetic energy being converted to potential, you have heat being released. Okay, on a cellular level, that's pretty cool because you can kind of see why our body's able to maintain a constant temperature. There's other reasons why it does too, but you can kind of see how this would help it. We have all of these energy conversions happening on a cellular level. It's all producing heat, and that can be used to help keep our body at a constant temperature. So all these energy interactions, okay? All right, another term. When we're talking about heat, we also need to talk about a term called entropy. Entropy is the measure of, the measure of disorder, the measure of randomness, okay, in a system. It is not the measure of order, the opposite, it's the measure of disorder. Oh my gosh, random. All right, so how does heat and entropy, how do those two go together? Well, heat is energy in its most chaotic form. Entropy is a measure of chaos. So if I have a system that has a lot of heat, am I going to have a lot of entropy or not a lot of entropy? How do those go together? If you said that they are directly proportional, or that as heat increases, so does entropy, you get 500 points for this one. Very good. Okay, so the more heat is in a system, the more entropy it has, the more chaotic it is, the more disordered it is. Okay. All right, so we talked about, I kind of talked about all these little cellular interactions and body temperature. So we can kind of think about that as part of metabolism. Metabolism is probably a term you've heard of when it comes to diet and eating and foods and, you know, how your body processes energy. You know, people are talking about us having a fast metabolism or slow metabolism. Really what this is, metabolism is the total of all chemical reactions in an organism, okay? All of those chemical reactions that are taking place in the body, all of those together is what metabolism actually is. And so when it comes to fast or slow metabolism, there's more that goes into it, but you can think about it kind of like how, I don't know if I want to say how fast, but I guess kind of how efficient the body's able to go through these chemical reactions, okay? So this is what metabolism actually is. And it's used with diet and exercise and food and things like that, because again, when you eat something, your cells convert that potential to kinetic energy. And so then you have the chemical reactions that are letting that take place. Because remember that chemical energy is a special type of potential energy. Okay? Hopefully this is making sense. Please reach out to me if it's not. Okay, let me think for just a second. Tell you what, I'm gonna do something here. Maybe. Come on. Wake it up. Let's go. Okay, so what I want to do is, let's do, I have potential energy. And in this case, it's actually going to be chemical energy. And that's going to be the source of an apple. Okay? We know that apples are fruits. The macromolecule here that's associated with an apple, it's going to be carbohydrates. So when you break these down, they're going to be a bunch of glucose molecules, okay? So here's the chemical energy part. Okay, the apple's a special type of chemical energy because there's the energy stored in all of the bonds between these different sugars, okay? When you eat the apple, okay, cells are going to go through this process of converting it, those carbohydrates from your chemical energy, potential energy, to kinetic. Hang on a second, let me just set this down. Okay, so we started over here with our potential energy, in this case an apple, which has chemical energy, that special type of potential energy. Chemical energy is the carbohydrates and the bonds that are held between these carbohydrates, between the sugars. When you eat the apple, your body is going to convert that chemical energy from the carbs into kinetic energy, which your body uses for work. Okay. During this whole process of all of this that's happening, you have heat released. Okay, remember, because every chemical conversion right here, any energy or conversion of energy generates heat. We have this because we've got chemical energy going to kinetic energy, so heat is released in this process. And when heat is released, our entropy increases. Okay? Let me know if this makes sense or not. And if it doesn't, let me know how I can help it make sense. Okay, let's move on. And I am going to come over here. What am I going to share? I am going to share my PowerPoint. All right. Okay, so we talked about ATP being the source of energy in our cells, okay? I'm actually going to write some of your terms here. So if you are physically taking notes, writing them down yourself, you would want to write down what I'm about to, okay? So I usually would write it on the whiteboard, but I'm going to write on some of these slides instead. So I have ATP. ATP is cellular energy. Some textbooks and some like YouTube lectures and stuff will call this cellular currency. And really, that's not a bad way to think about it. If you're having a hard time grasping the energy concept, you can think about ATP as being the payment system, if you will, between cells. I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But in the meantime, ATP is energy. The A stands for adenosine, the T is for tri, and the P is for phosphate. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Called that because we have an adenosine molecule, okay, attached to ribose. Anybody remember? Actually, I guess I didn't go over it in this class yet. Never mind, we haven't gotten there. Ribose is a sugar. Okay, so we have an adenosine molecule attached to a sugar, and then here comes our triphosphate. These three guys here are phosphate molecules. Usually call it like a tail. All right, these lines represent the covalent bonds that are holding this molecule together. And if you'll notice, in the bond between the sugar and the first phosphate, you've got a little bit of energy, okay? And the bond that's between the first and second phosphates, you've got some energy. And then finally, in the bond between the second and third, or second and last phosphates, you have a lot of energy, okay? of that's because we don't have any other bond over here that has to be broken. This is just free once we get to this point. Okay. In order to harness the energy that our cells need, what happens is our bodies are going to break this bond right here between the second and third phosphates. When this bond is broken, energy is released. Okay. When that energy is released, it gets used to go through this whole big process called cellular respiration, which we'll go over in the next chapter. But in the process of cellular respiration, mitochondria is used to make even more energy. So we've got some that are going to help with making more energy, but other ATP molecules are going to be sent to other parts, other cells, where they're going to be used to do work, like in your muscles, right? ATP is required to make the contraction and relaxation process happen. So ATP is going to be used not only to make more energy, but also to allow other cells to do work. Okay, so really important here, ATP. In order for ATP to go through this process of making energy happen, hang on one second. Sorry, this slide is a little bit blurry, but there's this process that takes place between ATP and a molecule called ADP. Okay, ADP is adenosine diphosphate. Why? Because look, here's the triphosphate with this third phosphate. Here's the diphosphate. Where did it go? Okay. When this phosphate gets released because the bond was broken, it's one of the molecules, one of the atoms that are going to get used to attach other places. And I'm not going to go into all of that in depth. But basically, you have adenosine diphosphate, which comes from ATP. So you have this process of going from ATP to ADP. And then when we need to make more energy, we attach a phosphate back, and now we're back at ATP. So it's this cyclical process that happens repeatedly. Break this last phosphate off to release energy. Now we need to make more energy. Well, let's put the phosphate back on. Okay, so when the phosphate is put back on, we're back to having our state of potential energy. Okay, so I'm going to come back here to our adenosine triphosphate. And like I said, I'm going to use it to make some notes. And again, if you're writing notes down, you would write this down. Sorry, guys. It's hard to talk. ATP. Okay. This is going to allow cells to perform 3 types of work. Okay. So the first type of work it's going to allow is mechanical. Think about the process that goes into cell division and muscle movement and things like that. Chemical. Think about the chemical components of digestion. And then the last one is transport, which we talk about a little bit in this chapter, but there are times when the cell has to transport things in the body that requires energy in order to move. Okay? So in this process, slide again. In this process here of ATP becoming ADP and then back again, when you have a muscle cell that's working, in other words, you're you're using it, you're doing something, whether it's you're working out or you're running or you're just moving boxes around, whatever, okay? So if you have a working muscle cell, what that means is you're going through up to 10 million ATP. When I say used and recycled, it means this process here that I drew, ATP to ADP, and then ADP back to ATP. Here's the crazy part. This happens in a second. 10 million conversions can happen per second in a working muscle cell. That's a lot of ATP. Just in case you weren't sure, that's a lot. Okay, I've noticed that it doesn't say in an entire muscle. It says in a muscle cell. One cell. Your cells have lots of muscles. No, reverse that. Like Willy Wonka says. Your muscles have lots of cells. That's what I was trying to say. Your muscles have lots of cells, and they're all going through this process when your entire muscle is being engaged. So you're burning through a ton of ATP, which is pretty amazing, but also is going to make the next chapter on how we get more ATP all the more important, because without this, we die. Like, it literally comes down to that. If your body is not generating ATP, you're dead. Period. End of story. Okay? So it's a little bit important. When it comes to like, why do I have to know this? Yes, it's going to be on a test. But also, this is the reason that we're all alive. Okay? And we'll kind of be able to talk about how some of the body systems play into allowing ATP to be made. It's why you breathe, it's why you digest food, things like that. Okay? Right. All right. So that's kind of the ATP part for now. And I'm actually going to stop this here because there's going to be a couple components that we'll go over in this lecture. So I'm going to end the ATP and energy lecture at this point. And again, if there's questions, if you're not sure of something, please reach out to me and let me know so that I can try to make this more comfortable for you, for all of us. Okay. Before we go, I just have to ask you, because if we were all in class together, I'd be asking you this. I watched Devil all the time this weekend on Netflix, and oh my goodness, I can't stop thinking about it. Have you guys seen it? If you haven't, I encourage you to go watch it. It's got a really killer cast, including the guy that played Dudley Dursley from Harry Potter. See if you can spot him. He's in that. He has a good role, a big role. Yeah, there's a ton of people in this that I really enjoyed getting to watch play different characters and kind of having to be different people. Yeah, kind of just do one of those like kind of disturbing movies, but then I don't know, it stuck with me. It stuck with me. So yeah, watch it if you haven't. If you have, let me know what you think about it. Because I was like to know. I don't know, we would talk about stuff like this randomly in lectures. And everybody's brain needed a break. Stop and talk about movies. Also have the epic Marvel versus DC debate. In case you're wondering, Marvel's better by far than DC. Captain America is the best superhero because he has integrity and honesty, and I love those qualities, and he's better. Don't start me on Batman. Don't start me. DC, first of all, I've already made that clear that Marvel is superior to DC. And, you know, Batman is moody and he has a lot of money and a tool belt that has bat shark repellent kept in it. If you are going to watch Batman, you gotta watch the 1960s version with Adam West. Okay, first off, the movie making or the episode making was fantastic because when they would have the fight scenes, they would have like the comic book bubbles and say kapow, splat, kerbam. And then Adam West was just the right kind of ironic, I guess, when he'd play the role. So if you're gonna watch Batman, at least do that. I hear that Robert Pattinson is the new Batman. I don't know. I mean, he's been stellar in a lot of the new stuff that he's come out with, Devil All the Time included. So that makes me want to see what he does with it. But again, like when it comes down to it, Batman has some serious therapy needs, as we all do. And then he has a lot of money and a fancy belt and car and Batcopter and Batcave and Batarangs. You can make anything into a bat something. A bat notebook, a bat pen. And it would be $1 million because it's bat something. He made it. And yeah, and so he walks around and thinks that he's this moody superhero, anti-hero. All right, that's it. I'm done with my rant. Can't promise there won't be others on other topics. I have a plethora of topics. Unfortunately, I don't get to hear your responses, so in a way I'm talking to myself. But I've done weirder things. Just saying. All right, holler back at me. Let me know where you stand on the Marvel versus DC debate. I'm not saying I'm going to fail you if you like DC, but I'll just leave it at that. All right, have a good rest of your day.